Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our third in this fantastic series called Peace is Possible. This evening, we have the absolute pleasure of hearing from the leaders of Roots, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Noor Awad, who will be joining us shortly, please God. And it is fantastic. They will share their vision of what they are developing in Israel and what is in Palestine and the peacemaking processes that they are working on together. But before I hand over to them, I'd like to hand over to Rabbi Jeffrey Kamens to give acknowledgement of action.
And it is always such a pleasure to join everyone, and especially to thank you, Rabbi Krebs, for making these programs as inclusive and community-wide as possible. I am here in Paddington. You are up near St. Ives, so we're actually in two different lands in this great country of ours, Australia. We acknowledge here in the eastern suburbs the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and where you are the Goringai clan and people. And we acknowledge their leaders, past, present, and emerging, and pledge to walk together with them toward the future of voice, truth, and treaty as endorsed by this Jewish community through the Executive Council of Australia Jewry and the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. May we continue to work for justice and peace in this land.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kamens, and I'm glad that Noor is with us online. I've just joined him in. I don't think his camera is on, but he can switch his camera on and unmute himself when he's there. So just before I hand over, Rabbi Schlesinger and Noor are representing an organization called Roots Shorashim. And my apologies for the Arab name. You'll correct me, Rabbi Schlesinger. But this is a really unique organization that is working with two groups of people that, if you believe the narrative that you're being fed, should be at each other's throats. These are the settlers and the Palestinians. And these are people who, if you read everything you read in the newspapers, these are the people who are at the front line of the conflict. And here we're going to see this evening a different way of looking at it and a different way of approaching it. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Rabbi Schlesinger and to Noor.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hanan Schlesinger. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then Noor will speak for about 20 minutes, and then questions and answers. So before I begin introducing myself, I'm going to introduce a little piece of land. There's a piece of land in the area that some call the West Bank, and some call disputed territory, and some called liberated territory, and some called Palestine, and some call Greater Israel. There's a little piece of land that, for me and for many others, is something like the Garden of Eden. It's a paradise. And the reason this little piece of land is a paradise is because it's the only, literally the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank, in the whole Greater Israel, in the whole Palestinian territories, in the whole disputed occupied territory. You see, where we live in this land, myself and Noor, Israelis and Palestinians are totally separate. Different towns and villages, different languages, different religions, different educational systems, different transportation systems, different municipalities. We live also under different law. I live under Israeli law. Noor lives under the military law of the Israeli army. Everything is separate. We even live in different time zones. Sometimes we switch to and from daylight savings time in different days or weeks or months. And under these conditions in which we live so close to each other, but so far away, there's of course ignorance of the other and the stereotypes, there's racism, there's bigotry, and there is fear. We live in fear of each other, with no knowledge of the other. And even if there were Israelis and Palestinians in this land who would want to meet, there's no place to do it. Because we Israelis can't go into Palestinian villages. It's illegal according to Israeli military law. And they, the Palestinians, can't go into our towns and villages in the West Bank / Judea and Samaria because it's forbidden by Israeli military law. So even if there were crazy Israelis and crazy Palestinians who wanted to meet each other, there's absolutely no place to do it. Until 6.5 years ago, we created the Dignity Center. That's Merkaz Karama. Merkaz is Hebrew for center. Karama is Arabic dignity. The Dignity Center is a little oasis, a Garden of Eden where the two sides can and do meet each other every day. We have their dialogue. religious dialogue, interfaith dialogue between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. We have women's groups. We have photography workshops. We have after-school play activities for little kids. We have photography workshops for middle school kids. We have a youth movement for high school kids. Everything is bringing the two sides together. These two sides who have never really been in the same room together. We have a summer camp. We have a day camp. We have trauma therapy. We have music workshops. And when the two sides meet each other, there's hesitancy. Of course, they sit on different sides of the room, but then we break the ice through facilitated discussions or just through open conversation without any facilitation. And you see people surprised that they're meeting a human being. They're surprised that they're surprised, but they're surprised. And little human transformations begin to take place. People come to me at the end of activities and they say, that was great. I say, what was so great? They say, you see the guy on the other side of the room there? I talked to him. Talking to the guy on the other side of the room, that's amazing. That's a miracle. I also call our Garden of Eden, our Dignity Center, I call it a mental health clinic, because I think most Israelis and most Palestinians are sick, because ignorance and bigotry vis-a-vis the other, and that fear that's part of our identities, fear of the other, that's a sickness. And a little bit of healing begins to take place in our Dignity Center. The organization, as the rabbi mentioned, the organization that created the Dignity Center's roots, in Arabic that's Judhur, in Hebrew Shorashim, the Israeli-Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding Nonviolence and Transformation. I introduced the place. Now I'm going to introduce myself. I said my name is Hanan Schlesinger. I'm a rabbi. I live in Alon Shvut, which is a settlement of about 3,000 people in Gush Etzion, which is in the land of Judea, south of Jerusalem, in what we Jews call Judea and Samaria, what the Palestinians call Palestine. And I'd like to use 3 words to introduce myself: Jew, Zionist, settler. When I say I'm a Jew, I'm talking not about religion, about peoplehood, about that sense of being part of a chain of tradition that goes back 3,000 years, that sense that all the stages of Jewish history are part of my collective expanded identity. And I know, as a Jew who's been on this earth for 3,000 years, that we were born, the Jewish people, in the land of Israel, then called the land of Canaan. And I know that since then, we've always been somehow connected to the land. And from my perspective, it's impossible to separate Jewish identity from the land of Israel. And that's why, for me, I can move seamlessly from talking about myself as a Jew to talking about myself as a Zionist. Zionism is a modern political movement. It's only been around 150 years, but no. From my perspective, Zionism is nothing more than the political framework to fulfill, to consummate the very meaning of Jewish identity, the Jewish story. For 2,000 years, since the Romans exiled us in the year 70 of the Common Era, we've been in exile. We've been hoping, praying, yearning, crying to come home. And now, after 2,000 years, we can and we have come home. I was born in New York, not in Israel. I made Aliyah, ascended to land when I was 18, took my 2 bags and got on the plane, and I came home. That's the way I describe making Aliyah, to come home. And there's nothing for me more fulfilling than that. So I said I'm a Jew, I said I'm a Zionist, and I said I'm a settler, which means I live in the area I've been talking about, the land called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, disputed territory, occupied territory, liberated territory. Why do I live there? Because of history. The Jewish people were born not in Tel Aviv, not in Ashdod, not in Haifa, not in the coastal cities. We were born in what we call today the West Bank. That's where Abraham, Sarah, that's where Jacob, that's where the patriarchs, that's where David and Solomon, that's where everything started. That's where everything centered. That's where the Bible was written. 90% was written in the West Bank. And during the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in our land, we mostly lived in the West Bank, not in Tel Aviv, not on the coast. Now, those coastal cities are part of the land of Israel, of course, part of the state of Israel. But where do we have our history? Where do we have our roots? Where do we have the archaeology that reminds us of the chain of tradition? Where can you go outside with the Bible and read the verses and walk in the footsteps of the characters that you're reading about? It's in the West Bank. So I live there because of the chain of history. I live there because of that sense that we are now creating a new link in that chain. That's it's continuous, and I'm part of that. And I call it Judea and Samaria, not to make a political statement, but to make a historical statement. I call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Bible calls it. That's what the Jews have called it for the past 2,500 years. Judea is the land south of Jerusalem, where the tribe of Judah inherited and created later the kingdom called the Kingdom of Judah, and north of Jerusalem is Samaria. Samaria is the name of the Kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes that lived north of Jerusalem. So I call it what I call it, and I live where I live because of the sense of being a link in a continuing chain of historical tradition, and for me, that's really powerful. And then 6.5 years ago, I realized that I was blind. And I don't mean that everything I told you is false. I mean that everything I told you is only partly true. That there's another truth, there's another story in the land. But for over 3.5 decades, I lived as if my story and my truth are the only truth and the only story in this land. And when you take partial truth and think of it as the only complete truth, that's, I think, when truth becomes falsehood and blindness. I lived for 3.5 decades as if there's no Palestinians, as if they don't exist, as if they're invisible. They, for me, were like the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, but is not part of the plot, can be ignored. The beginning of my new perspective began, you could say, one day 6.5 years ago. I was driving in my car. I had 2 guests from the US who wanted me to show them the flourishing of Jewish settlement, how the visions of the Bible are coming true. So we drove around and I showed them the roads we paved, the forests that we planted, and the buildings that we've constructed. I showed them with great pride. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker. Later, I picked up a second hitchhiker. And after the 2 hitchhikers got out of the car, one of my guests, they were pastors, said to me, Hanan, you just did a great thing. You taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. You picked up hitchhikers. Well, no one does that back in Texas where we come from. So I said, look, Bob, it's not just me around here. We all pick up hitchhikers. We trust each other because we have a common vision. And I do my best, like everyone else, to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to my guest, but even worse, I was lying to myself. A Palestinian had never set foot in my car. They're 90% of the population. They walk in the hot sun. How could I say that I pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride? Obviously, it means that I didn't see the Palestinians, or I didn't see them as significant human beings. They were invisible for me. And at that moment, with 2 men of the cloth in the car, I felt embarrassed by my blindness. And I said to myself, and I said to them, actually, there is something rotten inside me, and I have to fix it. I have to learn, I have to teach myself to see the Palestinians, to see them. And I decided the way to do that is to meet my Palestinian neighbors. They're all over the place. There's a Palestinian village, literally a 500-yard walk from my front door. But I'd never met one in my life. So I went on this journey to meet Palestinians, and it turned out to be difficult. I had no connections until, long story, someone gave me a day, a time, and a place to go to meet them. So the day rolled around. This is January 2014. I'm about to leave my house. I put my hand on the front doorknob. My wife says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to meet Palestinians. And she screams, you can't go, they're going to kill you. Don't. And I approached her. I saw the terror, the absolute terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. I had to do it, even though I was almost afraid as she was. I walked out the front door. My heart is pounding. I didn't know what they'd do to me. I didn't take the car. According to the directions I got, it was probably within walking distance. So I started to walk. I got there in about 23 minutes. I found it was a piece of Palestinian farmland in the middle of nowhere, but near a main road. It's a field. I walk in, surrounded by a rock fence. There's no buildings there. There's very few trees, but I see a miracle. I see 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. They're doing the strangest thing. They're talking to each other. That doesn't occur usually where we come from. They're in groups of 2 and 3 and 4, talking and eating. I walked up to this woman who wasn't talking to anyone. She's dressed in brown from head to toe. I can see only her face, an observant Muslim, clearly. I said, hello. She said hello back to me. We talked in English for a minute, perhaps 2. Then I said to her, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And she responded to me, I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers. The silence lasted only a few seconds. The conversation continued, but not for long because her son comes over. And she tells me his name is Yazin and he's 17 years old. So Yazin and I shake hands and I see he's wearing a windbreaker. And on the windbreaker were written 3 words over the lapel. And the 3 words were seeds of peace in English, seeds of peace. Now, I had no idea what seeds of peace is, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty, which is that peace and Palestinians don't mix because they're all violent terrorists. So I said to myself, this young man probably doesn't know what his jacket says. If he knew, he wouldn't wear it. Jokingly, I said to Yazin, what's this seeds of peace thing? I thought he'd said, who knows? And he goes on to tell me that it's the name of a summer camp in the USA, in the state of Maine. And he told me he just got back from that summer camp a few months ago. It's a camp that takes Israeli and Palestinians, young people out of this conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He said, I had a great time. He met Israeli kids, they're friends on Facebook. And he said he was so affected by the summer that now he's planning to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And I'm listening to Yazin, and I don't know if I can believe what he's saying. It contradicts everything I know to be true. And I was getting confused. You might say that Yazin was the first Palestinian that succeeded in unsettling me. And then his father walks over. His father's name is Jamal. We shake hands. Jamal tells me they live in Beit Umar. Uh-oh. I know Beit Umar. It's a Palestinian town, 20,000 Palestinians, just a 6-minute drive from my house to the south. That's where the terrorists come from. People have been arrested for murder from that place. They throw rocks at us as we drive on the road below the village. How can I talk to those people? But I just did. The mother, the son, I'm talking now to the father. It was challenging for me. Jamal starts to tell me the story of his life. He tells me many things. Here are 2 anecdotes. One, he says, Hanan, you know, there are no Israelis in Beit Umar, only Palestinians. We don't know any Israelis except for the Israeli soldiers who guard the entrance to the city and make life miserable for us. So we hate the soldiers, and by extension, we hate all Israelis. We'd never, ever want to meet one. But, Jamal said, he had this friend years ago in Beit Umar, a Palestinian Muslim, who said to him, Jamal, come along with me. I go to interfaith dialogue between Muslim Palestinians and Israeli Jews in the city of Jericho. And Jamal looked at me and he said, Hanan, I told my friend, I'll never ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. But the friend wouldn't get off his back, kept trying to convince him to come, and Jamal tagged along once. Jamal told me they sat in a big circle, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Muslims, but I, Jamal, did not participate. I sat in the corner, outside of the circle, but I listened. And at one point, Jamal's telling me, an Israeli man, a Jew, got up from his chair and looked at me, Jamal says. And he started walking towards me. I was really afraid what he'd do to me. He came right up to me and he forced me to shake his hand. Really difficult. And then he asked me questions. I had to answer his questions. We had a conversation. And when the guy finally left, Jamal said, I, Jamal, wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wash off the filth from my hand from touching an Israeli Jew, and I vowed never to go back to this terrible, cursed place again. He went home, told his wife. She was very angry that he was there. They agreed it was a big mistake. Never tell anyone, just forget about it. But Jamal's friend wouldn't forget about it, kept trying to get him to go back. Jamal somehow went back a second time, and then a third time. Then he brought his wife with him, and then their kids. And Jamal ends his story by taking out his cell phone and showing me a picture of the entrance to his house in Beit Umar. Remember, for me, Beit Umar is a den of terrorists, and there's a plaque. I see in the picture a plaque on his front door that says in English and Arabic, House of Peace. And Jamal looks at me and says, Hanan, at those sessions in Jericho, where I thought there was only an enemy, I found a human being and a partner, and that changed me. And I'm listening to this, and I don't know what to do to myself. This can't be. This is totally contradictory to everything that I know and think and live. And Jamal tells me another story. He says, Hanan, you know, the little kids in Beit Umar, when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. He said, Jamal, why do they start to cry? And Jamal doesn't understand why I don't understand. And then he says, Hanan, you don't get it? It's because of the kippah you have on your head. And it's because of the long beard. All the people look like you. They carry submachine guns and they walk into Beit Umar and kill the kids. He does like this. They kill the kids. Silence. I don't know what to say to him. It sounds to me like an anti-Semitic stereotype. Such things don't happen. And I wanted to tell him off. But semi understood that my job, my role at that moment is to stay silent and listen. It was a moment of blessing in my life, because for the first time in my life, I experienced how the other experiences me. And you can only grow from that if you're able to hold it. And it was really hard for me to hold it. I felt the rage welling up inside me. But before I said anything, a light bulb goes up in my mind, and I say to myself, yeah, my neighbors carry guns when they walk outside. That must be frightening to the Palestinians and their children. And I felt that somehow I understood it. And I said to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he said, no, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us. We're afraid of you. And I was confounded by that realization that we're afraid of each other. I was challenged. But I didn't have time to think too much, because then we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians, and the convener of the event, Ali Abu Awad, the owner of the land on which we were sitting, gets up and introduces himself. He says, I'm Ali Abu Awad. I'm from a proud Palestinian family. For generations upon generations, we lived near the coast in a village called Kubeba. Now the Israelis call it Kiryat Gat or Lachish. But in 1948, there was a war and the Israelis forced us out. We came here to the West Bank. We've been living in Beit Umar since then. And then in 1967, he said, the Israelis came again. And since then, we're suffering under the rigors and the injustices of the Israeli occupation. And Israeli, what did he say? Occupation? Never in my life had a human being use those words in my presence, face to face. I'd read in the newspaper, heard on the radio, the occupation, the United Nations always condemning, but I never heard a human being tells me he lives under occupation. And I really couldn't imagine what he was talking about. Because when I, Hanan Schlesinger, drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? And suddenly, here I am listening to this Palestinian, Ali Abu Awad, who's talking about suffering under occupation. And he's telling us that our Jewish triumph of the spirit is his nation's tragedy, his nation's suffering. What am I going to do with that? Where am I going to put it? And he talks about what the army did to his mother, to his brother, to himself. Brother was killed by Israeli soldiers. Mother was put in jail for 6 years. He was sentenced, he said, to 10 years in jail and never told what the charges against him were. It was confounding to hear these things. They contradicted everything I thought. I wanted to get up and say, Ali, you're a liar, but I couldn't because he wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He was just telling his life story. And I went home, confused, confounded, upset. I immediately realized that here are stories, here's a reality that's right around me that I never heard for 3.5 decades. I have to come to terms with it. I entered into a state that you could call spiritual confusion or depression. I remember pacing back and forth in my study for days and weeks on end, trying to figure this out, getting really nauseous, physically nauseous. I went back and I met Ali Abu Awad again and again and again. It wasn't just me. A number of Israelis wanted to meet the guy. A number of Palestinians wanted to sit together with the Israelis who were meeting Ali. and we talked. And we talked perhaps hundreds of hours over the course of half a year. And somehow, I don't know how we did this, but we had unwritten ground rules that said we're not there to yell and scream. We're not there to prove that we're right and they're wrong. We're there only for one purpose that has two sides to it, to tell stories and to listen to stories. And the Palestinians told us their story again and again and again. The story of a people living in their land who come face to face with intruders, the Israelis. They told us the story of their tragedy of 1948. They told us the tragedy of living under occupation. They told us about suffering from the Israeli soldiers and the Israeli settlers. And they told us that the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean is Palestine for them. And hearing their stories was like a dagger to our hearts, a dagger to our hearts. But we listened. We wanted to run away sometimes, we wanted to argue, but somehow we just listened. And then it was our turn. And we Israeli Jews told our story of 3,000 years of connection to this land, of 2,000 years of exile, of coming home. And when a Jew says he's come home to the land of Israel, that's like a dagger to the Palestinian hearts. But they listened. And we began to see how each side has been building its identity upon the nullification of the other side's identity. And each side has been claiming that we're right and you're wrong. We exist and you don't exist. The Palestinians say, Jews, beautiful. The Quran loves the Jews, but you're a religion, not a people. What are you coming and taking our land for? Go back to Russia, go back to the US. You don't belong here. And the Israelis are saying to the Palestinians, Palestinian? No, there's no such thing. You're Arabs. There never was a Palestinian state. Go back to Jordan, go back to Syria, to Lebanon. And somehow we began to understand, in the words of Ali Abu Awad, that we're both right. And we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart. Two truths into one heart, into one land. And we began to see how this conflict is not just a conflict of politics. It's not just borders. It's not just resources. It's not just security. It's a conflict over identity, which means that although the political discussions and negotiations are crucial, they can't really succeed until we first negotiate identity. What I mean by that is until we accept legitimacy and we recognize the truth of the other side's connection to the land. We came to the conclusion, as we began to found Roots 6 years ago, we came to the conclusion, and this is painful for me to say, we came to the conclusion that the whole land, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, is Palestine. And the same whole land, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, is Israel. They're both right. And we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart. So what Roots does is it brings the two sides together in a local initiative in Judea, in the area between Bethlehem and Hebron, local Israeli settlers with local Palestinians, people who are religious, usually deeply connected to their own narratives, people who usually live with what I call the hubris of exclusivity. As if our truth and our connection to land is all there is, the other side doesn't exist. And we're helping people to undergo the micro transformation in which you expand your identity and you're to a certain degree healed from the hubris of exclusivity to see that the other side is true as well. And the fact that we're doing this with religious Muslims and religious Jews, people who are usually considered to be and consider themselves to be the enemies of peace, this we think is the key. We are, in our understanding, preparing the human groundwork for peace, for justice, for reconciliation, so that ultimately the two sides can live in this land, this little strip of land, in justice and reconciliation together. Thank you.
All right, Noor, the spotlight is on you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Noor. and I live in Bethlehem. And I'm going to talk about my personal story in the next 20 minutes, and who am I and how I joined Roots. So I live in Bethlehem here in the West Bank, but I was born in Amman in Jordan in the year 1991. I was born there for a Palestinian family, Palestinian parents, but my story goes back to 42 years before I was born. What do I mean when I say that? 42 years from when I was born, that was 1948. In 1948, my family lived in a village in southwest of Jerusalem, that village called Malha. They used to live there for many, many generations, like many other Palestinian families, until the war of 1948 began, and there was a lot of violence in their area. So my grandparents and the people of my village, they decided to leave their village temporarily. They wanted to go, or they went to a refugee camp nearby that was established by the United Nations in north of Bethlehem. And they thought they are going to stay there for a short time, maybe a few days, a week, and then they will go back to their village after the attacks and after the violence will stop. So my grandparents on both sides left the village and went to the refugee camp in Bethlehem. They stayed there for a while, but then they ended up staying for 1.5 years when they realized by the end of 1949, after the last ceasefire agreement was signed between Israel and Jordan, they can't go back to their village. The ceasefire line, what we also call it the green line, was exactly drawn between their village and the refugee camp. It passes between the two places. So on the other side now, the village became on the Israeli side of the green line, where they can't go back as Palestinian refugees. And they are on the Jordanian side of the green line in a refugee camp in the city of Bethlehem. My grandfather, he actually took his family and left the refugee camp and he moved to the city of Bethlehem. And since then, my family lived here. But my father, actually, in 1980s, he decided to leave the country. He wanted to go abroad. He was on his way to Germany, but he stopped for a short time in Amman, and then he ended up actually staying there and then got married. So that's how I was born there. In 1995, when the Oslo peace process was actually happening, my family, especially my mother, felt very optimistic, very hopeful that now they are talking about ending the occupation. They are talking about a Palestinian state and independence. And so my family had the hope to go back and to re-establish a life, to establish a future for us here in Palestine. Yes, they can't go back to Malha, to West Jerusalem, but at least we can come back here to Bethlehem and live a normal life. So my family moved back, and let me tell you, when I was a kid, in these years, 1990s, I didn't really remember so much of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't remember so much of the occupation. Most of my childhood memories comes from the times when we used to go to Jerusalem every weekend, especially on Fridays. We go to the prayer at Al-Aqsa, at the Noble Sanctuary, the Temple Mount. Or when we go the weekends to the beach, even sometimes. We go to the north and south, and we travel around the country. I'm not saying there was no conflict and there was no occupation at all, or the occupation disappeared, but that was my experience as a kid when I lived here before the year 2000. But then the year 2000 came, and the peace process came to a dead end. Things got very complicated and very frustrating for my side. And the second uprising started as a reaction to many things on the ground, many factors. The second Intifada, the second Palestinian uprising, was a very violent chapter of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it made things very complicated. For me, it turned my life upside down. And it's not just me, I think it affected people on both sides. But all of a sudden, this peaceful, normal place that I felt or I lived in turned into a chaos and violence. And the army came into Bethlehem at some point, and there was curfews and no schools and besieging Bethlehem and all of that. So going through the years of the Intifada was very difficult, but that's also the time that I grew up and I learned more and more about who am I and what's happening in my country here in my homeland. And also it shaped my way of looking at Israelis. So I know Israelis now as soldiers, as enemies, the ones who took our lands in 1948, the ones who occupy us now, and this is what's happening around me. By the end of the years of the Intifada, around the year 2005, 2006, as a teenager, I started to think about myself and my future. in the sense of I start to ask myself, do I see for myself a future here? Do I see for myself a normal life here? And obviously, I mean, I realized that I'm not living in a normal situation. So I said to myself, no, I don't have a normal life here, and I will not have a future here. So maybe I should just forget about it and leave. When I have a chance to run away from here, I will do it. I will run away. That's how I started, actually, that's how I grew up thinking at some point and part of my life. On the other hand, going to, through the education system here, and then I had to go to, I went to a small college in Bethlehem. I learned to become a tour guide. This is what I do for a living. This is my job, a tour guide. But you know, now during Corona time, this is maybe the worst part or the worst job to be working in is tourism. But back then, so I started to study in this college, and I started to encounter another way of thinking. And that way of thinking is like this, if I want to describe it. When we talk about the conflict, by the word we, I'm referring to the current Palestinian generation, to my generation. We are 3 generations from 1948. When we talk about the conflict, about occupation, yes, there is Israel and they are the enemy and occupation and all of that, but we also criticize ourselves. We criticize and we blame mostly the older generations. We say that we live in this situation now in 2020 or back in 2006 because the previous generations didn't do enough. They didn't take their responsibility. That's why we are living this situation. If they did better, then our future, our situation will be better now. But then I said to myself, in a way, if I'm blaming the older generation of not taking responsibility, and my solution to the problem is to give up and run away when I have a chance, then how I'm taking responsibility? I'm not doing that. I'm doing the same thing that I'm accusing the older generations of doing. So I said to myself that this generation actually must stand up, stay here, resist, do something until this reality changes and we bring a better future in our country. Now, when I say the word resist, for many reasons, the experience of resistance, the narrative that we have, it's mostly associated with violence because we live and see and experience the power imbalance between us and Israel. We as Palestinians, we don't have a country, we don't have an army to defend ourselves. We live under their occupation. But there are moments in our history where we achieved maybe partial victory or a small scale victory through violence. So I say to myself, you know, resistance usually means violence. Most of the time it means violence. And I, at some point, participated in this violence, from participating in a protest and throwing rocks and all of that. But there are also examples of nonviolent resistance in our narrative and in our story with the Israelis. And I also started at some point to focus on that and focus on how nonviolence could engage more of the civil society, more people to be engaged in resistance against occupation. And at some point in my life, in 2014, by 2014, I already joined the tour guiding program and in 2014, I got my license from the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. So I became a licensed tour guide, and I mostly worked in the West Bank. Because of the movement restrictions, I'm not allowed to work in East Jerusalem. I am not allowed to work in Israel proper, like Tel Aviv, the Galilee area and South, but mostly working in Bethlehem. Which is, I think most of you know, this is the birthplace of Jesus, and there are many Christian pilgrims that comes here every year. But I didn't really work with typical Christian pilgrims. I worked, since I started, with people who also have other interests, who want to learn and understand more of the situation here. So I worked with these groups, and I worked with many student groups, for example, and in 2016, I was hired to guide a group of American students. They came from through a program called Middle East Studies. And the point was to visit Israel and Palestine and to visit the whole country, listen to the many perspectives, see both realities and learn more about it. So after they spent the time with an Israeli tour guide and they listened to Israeli politicians, now I was hired to take them for a day tour in the city of Hebron, in the old city of Hebron. And Hebron is one of the most complicated areas here when it comes to the conflict and occupation. So I took them that day in February 2016 to the old city of Hebron. I guided them and I showed them around, explained to them the situation there before Oslo Accords and after Oslo Accords and after the Intifada and now, and the occupation and all of that. So by the end of my tour, we were supposed to have 2 meetings. My group have to do actually 2 meetings. One was with an Israeli speaker in the old city of Hebron, which is not very usual to my groups to meet with Israeli speakers in the old city of Hebron. I mean a settler who lives in the old city of Hebron. The point of that meeting was to understand the Israeli settlers' perspective and what they are doing there in Hebron. So usually when a meeting like this happens, I have to hand over my group to the speaker. They go inside one of the settlements. I'm not allowed to go there as a Palestinian. So I wait my group until they finishes, and then I receive them back. But in that meeting, we managed to actually sit in the same place, me and the speaker and the group. The speaker started to talk to my group, and I remember that from his story, the way how he described to us himself, he told us a personal story. He grew up as an American Jew, lived in Brooklyn, and then he decided to come to Israel and living in Hebron. But from his story, I remember 2 things that he said. One, he said there is no occupation. We are not occupiers. We came here to our ancestral homeland, and we have the right to do that. Therefore, we are not occupiers. For me, for someone to deny this reality was very shocking, because the occupation is what I'm living day to day. I mean, I'm a citizen of no country. Yes, we have a Palestinian Authority according to the Oslo Accords, but the Palestinian Authority is not a state. So I am a stateless person, even though I live in my own country. I cannot become an Israeli citizen even if I want to. And like Hanan said at the beginning of his story, I'm subjected to the Israeli military law. And that applies for millions of Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza. So when you say there's no occupation, that's the reality I'm living. And then the second thing that he said, there is no Palestinian people, there is no such thing. There is only us, the Jews, the Israeli people. That's a real national identity. But the other side identity is just a fake thing. And I was very shocked and angry to hear that, to hear him saying that there is no Palestinian identity. Now, Hanan said something also similar in a way, said that both people, both sides don't really see or believe that the other side identity is legitimate, or at least legitimate as their identity. But back then, I didn't really realize that. I didn't really thought about it this way. I thought that, yes, our identity is legitimate, and their identity is just made up thing. It's not really, it's not real. They made it to take our lands. So I started arguing with him. And that argument didn't really end in a very positive way. And I remember going back from Hebron to Bethlehem, very frustrated from that meeting, especially when he insisted to describe that the conflict is taking place here only for religious reasons. I mean, I recognize the religious dimensions of the conflict, but he said it's only a religious conflict because of religion. And on the way back to Bethlehem, I had to stop for a last meeting, and that meeting was at Roots, the organization I'm talking on behalf today. Now, I knew nothing about Roots back then. All of what I knew is that I need to bring my group there to listen to another speaker, and he is an Israeli settler from the area of Gush Etzion. So I thought we are just meeting with another settler from that area. And I remember actually calling my tour agency, my tour operator, to ask them to clarify what Roots is about. And the guy who answered me on the phone said, Roots is a peace organization between a group of Palestinians and Israeli settlers. And I was shocked to hear that. What do you mean by peace between us and settlers? It doesn't sound in any positive way in this context. It sounds like a traitorous. It sounds like a very bad idea. Anyhow, I went there with my group and we met with Hanan Schlesinger. Hanan was the first person I met at Roots and one of the very few Israelis I met in 2016. The first Israelis I met in my life. Now, we sat there and Hanan began to explain to us what Roots is about through also telling us his personal story. At the beginning, I listened to Hanan identifying himself, saying, I'm a Jew, a Zionist, and a settler, using these three words to describe himself, and going to details to explain what each word means. I realized from the beginning that this man is very connected to his identity, and it means a lot to him. But at the same time, I can't listen to this, because these things that he's talking about in a proud way, these are sources of suffering for my side, for my people. But then I said to myself, you know, what do you want from him? Why you expect from an Israeli settler to talk about the occupation and about the injustices that his side is doing to my side? And I wanted to get up and leave and maybe go, you know, outside until this meeting finishes. But I didn't. I stayed till the end, and it was shocking to me to hear from Hanan the rest of his story when he talked about him realizing that there is another part of the truth. There is another story, another people, another reality. It lives right next to him, but he couldn't see it because of his identity. And then how he went through the process in order to see it. By the end of his talk, I immediately realized that I just met and I heard to a voice of recognition and empathy. Two things that you will not find within the most of people of Israel and Palestine. There is no recognition of the other side on different levels, on so many levels, and there is no empathy toward the other side. So, but I saw that now, I encountered that. And on the way back into Bethlehem, I felt very challenged, confused of what I just heard. I couldn't really still believe it, that it really exists. And I remember that after a few days, I kept in connection with Hanan, and I came back to Roots. And then I met with Ali, the Palestinian co-founder of Roots, and I met with Shaul, Myron, Khaled, and other activists. And then I said, this is my place. I'm joining this organization. And I'm joining it for two reasons, at least. One is that, as I said before, so this level of recognition, of genuine, real recognition between the two people, the two identities. Not just a political recognition between one government and the other, but a recognition between two identities. And two, because I talked in my story about the idea, the sense of we should take responsibility as this generation, as the people who are living on the ground in this reality. We must take responsibility toward the situation in order to change it and to have or to bring a better future. So I joined Roots because I saw it as an attempt of resisting the current situation and bring a new reality, a new future for us. So that's my story. That's how I joined Roots. I think we will go for questions now, Hanan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to, let me just give me 2 secs. We are now open to questions. If anyone would like to type their questions in, we'll just hand over. So we see 2 questions coming through, and between Noor and Rabbi Hanan, you can just decide how you're going to answer them. I suppose the question that is coming, so I'll just start with, is the uncertainty at the moment with regards to the potential of annexation, and how does this sort of movement, Rabbi Schlesinger, you sent me, and I think we'll post it online immediately after a statement came, but maybe just talk us through your guys' position regarding the potential annexation.
Noor, do you want to begin?
Sorry, I didn't really catch the question very well. It wasn't clear to me.
Sorry, just regarding annexation, and how does that complicate your guys' work?
Well, obviously the annexation plans and the actions on the grounds are making things very complicated. First of all, it's again another action, another unilateral action that takes out the trust between the two sides. It completely destroyed the trust on our side. We have been saying for years, at least, let us say the Palestinian leadership, represented by the Palestinian Authority and the PLO, it had been saying for long years that Israel must stop building settlements in order to go for a two-state negotiations, and they must stop taking lands, And now annexation is just another like dagger in the heart of the peace process. Many people on the ground, if I want to talk about Palestinian people, don't believe or don't see that the two-state solution is a possible option anymore from long time ago, at least 10 years ago. Many people felt that the two-state solution is not really relevant anymore. Many people don't have really the clear alternative, but at the same time, if annexation happened, they would like to see, and I'm talking here about Palestinians, that this will change their lives or impact it in a positive way, meaning that if Israel annexed the West Bank and gave people here equal rights and citizenships, no one will say no to that. It's much better to live with equal rights and citizenship than living under military occupation. That's not because all of a sudden we don't care about our Palestinian identity or we're not Palestinians, but that's the reality. We don't have a Palestinian state, but if we have an Israeli citizenship, we will have better lives. So that's how many people see it. But at the same time, many people realize that this is not what Israel is going to do when they talk about annexation. So it's like mostly it's affecting the trust between the two sides, and it destroyed the chances for any talks about two-state solution. So that's in general the view about it.
If I can, I see there's an interesting question. How do you guys communicate? What language do you? Is it Hebrew, Arabic, or English?
It's all three, depending on who's there. Well, I take it back. It's almost never Arabic, because very few Israelis know Arabic. It's sometimes English and it's sometimes Hebrew, depending on who's there, and sometimes we need translation. And I'll just add that the fact that the two sides mostly don't know the other side's language is a tremendous stumbling block. And one of the things that Roots believes in is that we should each learn the other side's language.
And another question was, have either of you been accused of being traitors, or are you ever in fear of your lives from your own communities, or your safety, I should say?
So I'll say that both of us, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, are certainly swimming against the grain of our respective communities. And we're certainly seen as outliers or as naive people who don't really understand the truth of the other side. Both sides said the other side only understands force, etc. I've never been called a traitor, but I think that many people do consider me a traitor. But I'll add that there's certainly no danger to my life. There's no danger to my social standing, and nothing's going to happen to me because of the work I do. And that may be different on the Palestinian side. I'll let Noor answer.
Well, I personally, I was never, I was never like under a threat from anyone. But yeah, I had many people who disagreed with me. Many people who actually stopped talking to me because of what I'm doing. Some of my friends, even and they believe what I'm doing is completely wrong. And there are people who challenged me. I'll say that 70% maybe from the people around me are very skeptical. Very skeptical, and they are just very affected by the actions that happens on the macro level, what the government is doing, what the army last night did. That's how people view things. But when I say to them, I met a nice Israeli, then it's okay. But when I say that, I met an Israeli who believes in peace and believes in this and that, people are just very skeptical about it. But there had been several cases where Palestinian activists were interrogated by the Palestinian security for suspicious events or complicated events that took place between Palestinians and Israeli settlers. There were some incitement campaign against one of our activists, and he was under pressure. He almost lost his job because of that. Again, I'm sure, like behind my back, there are some people who call me, the settlers guy, or a traitor or something like that, but never in my face, at least.
Noor opened up the matter of the opposition to our work because of the idea of non-normalization. And I see that's one of the questions that's in the chat, so perhaps we'll just say a few more words about that. From my perspective, again, from my perspective, Palestinians have very little means of asserting their dignity and their rights in the face of Israeli occupation. They're the weak side, we Israelis are the strong side. And it seems that one of the few ways that Palestinians have of asserting their rights and their dignity is by saying, we Palestinians are not going to talk to, we're not going to recognize those who we see as our oppressors. And that's the anti-normalization movement that says that Palestinians should not have normal interaction with Israelis because that whitewashes or recognizes or accepts the occupation. And many of our, let me say, some of our activists are threatened subtly, not so subtly by Palestinian anti-normalization activists, telling the Palestinians, don't go to Roots, don't participate because you are weakening the Palestinian cause. And they are, yes, they're threatened on Facebook. And this comes not just from Facebook and from their Palestinian friends and families, it also comes from the Palestinian Authority, who also feels that the Palestinian resolve may be weakened by Palestinians talking to those who are seen as the oppressors. Now, I want to say two more things, or one thing that's two, which is I recognize the Palestinian need or right to boycott Israel, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. If Palestinians want to economically boycott Israel, well, I don't like it, but that's nonviolent resistance, and that's their right. I don't think it's going to work, but I can't prove that. However, when economic boycott becomes cultural boycott, when economic boycott becomes an ideology that says we can't talk to the enemy, we can't meet the enemy, then I really see the Palestinians as shooting themselves in the foot. Because I think that until they meet us and talk to us, until we meet and talk to them, there'll never be understanding, which means there'll never be peace. As I said earlier in my talk, this is not just about politics and borders and negotiations, it's about fundamentally recognizing the other side's identity. So I'm very upset and very saddened by the Palestinian anti-normalization movement that prevents Palestinians from being part of Roots. Because I say, look, what happened when Palestinians talked to me? They turned me from someone who was against Palestinians to someone who's in support of Palestinians. If you want to make more Israeli supporters of the justice of your cause, then talk to us, then convince us, open up a dialogue. But the anti-normalization movement prevents that dialogue from happening. And again, for me, that's very unfortunate because it's setting back, in my opinion, the Palestinian cause.
I see another question here about, is there space in the PA for young leaders who really want to make difference, to change direction after so many years of rejection and no alternative plans? My answer to this question is that for the one who asked, you have to understand that since 2005, 2006, since the last election happened of the Palestinian Authority, there is an entire generation that disconnected itself from the Palestinian Authority in the sense of this generation sees the Palestinian Authority not as a national project anymore, not as a national entity, but rather as a puppet government to Israel and to the Israeli occupation. Because of its actions on the ground, because of the continuous security coordination with the Israeli military, and because of there is no result after so many years of the security coordination. There is no two-state solution. There is no solution happening at all. Add to that the corruption that was very high in the 1990s of the Palestinian Authority, and that still exists now, and people are criticizing this corruption and suffering from it. So this generation is very convinced that the Palestinian Authority is in largely corrupted non-national government. That's not everyone. I'm not saying everyone is thinking like this, but that's, I think, the majority of my generation. So when it comes to change, I think when people, when they want to think about change, they were not thinking about actually going through the Palestinian Authority. There is no space for that. But to be fair, at the same time, there is a small, tiny group of young Palestinians who believe that there could be a change And that could happen through the old channels, through the Palestinian Authority, through the existing political platforms like the PLO or Fatah or other movements. This generation that I'm describing maybe for some time looked at Hamas as an alternative leadership. That because Hamas actually projected itself or delivered itself as such, as a good alternative for a failure Palestinian leadership. But also not anymore because of many problems with Hamas and Gaza Strip and what's happening there. And there is a very critical view of Hamas today, even among Palestinian young generation. So in my eyes, many of the young people are just disconnected from the political situation, and they believe that there is nothing they can do to change it as long as Israel is very powerful and it's supported by the most powerful country in the world, the US. And so, and the Arabs are not supporting us. They even betray us by normalizing and formalizing their ties with Israel. So the younger generation is very convinced that there is nothing they have in their hands to do. And the last thing they want to talk about is politics. That's how it feels. And the last part of this question is that years of rejection or rejectionism. I just want to clarify that there is a problem for me in actually saying that. And of course, for many Palestinians, when you talk about Palestinians, to talk any Palestinian, even if he or she is against or for the peace process, for the two-state solution, we don't see ourselves as the ones who are rejecting plans or ones who are rejecting solutions. We see that we have a right, we have, according to the international law, we have certain borders, we have certain rights. And since the peace process started, Israel never really showed the genuine will to give us back what is ours. I mean, our leadership accepted land swaps and accepted negotiations over Jerusalem and all of that, and borders and even security. We accepted the idea of having a demilitarized state with no control of our airspace. And we can talk about many details about this issue, about how two-state solution will happen. But this narrative of there is always Palestinian rejectionism, that's not true by us. That's actually, in a way, that's just like accusing the Palestinians of they are putting the stick in the wheel for a genuine or for a peace process to achieve a solution. But the question is, was there ever a genuine, real peace process in the last 25 years? From our perspective, and if you know more about the details, obviously there was not.
So I understand that the time is short. There are great questions in the chat box, but the time for this session is limited, so we want to close at this point. You can certainly write us questions by email, and we'll try to answer them. We're closing with the screen that everyone now has in front of them. What can you do? How can you get involved? So first, I want you to see that Roots has a website, friendsofroots.net, friendsofroots.net. Don't go to friendsofroots.org. It'll bring you to China to buy roots. We're not selling roots, we're selling peace. Friendsofroots.net. And there you can sign up for the Roots quarterly newsletter. And you'll be able to, in that way, stay in contact with us. You can also visit my personal website, ravchanan.org, ravchanan.org. And there, under the tab Palestinian-Israeli Reconciliation, you can find articles about the things we talked about and even deeper in this conversation. You can sign up on my website on the homepage to receive my monthly blog. Also, we really want everyone to like us on Facebook, Friends of Roots on Facebook. And in general, spread the word about what you heard here now. There's lots of material that I can send you that you can find on our website to spread on social media and to your friends. Nextly, we certainly need your help. Donate to Friends of Roots now or through the website. It's tax deductible, not in Australia. Sorry about that. Through credit card or through check, on the website, there's a donate tab. And obviously our work will not be able to continue if we don't have support from people around the world. In addition to that, before the virus began, and I assume after the virus ends, we'll be traveling around the world to speak in synagogues, churches, mosques, and universities, and also in parlor meetings and private homes. So invite us to Australia when that becomes possible. Invite us to Australia. Nextly, you can volunteer for the American Friends of Roots. I shouldn't say American Friends, I should say the Friends of Roots. We need people to help us with social media, with legal matters, with influencing, organizing, of course, money. We need translators. So connect to us through our Facebook page or through our website and volunteer. Next on the list, you find when visiting Israel or Palestine, visit Israel and Palestine. See the other side. Meet people from both sides and try to meet people in an organization that are involved in reconciliation. And of course, visit Roots at Merkaz Karama, the Dignity Center. You can also devote 2 or more months of interning with us on the ground or virtually. And of course, you should fill your Facebook page and social media with positive stories of Israeli-Palestinian rapprochement and reconciliation. Disseminate primarily positive stories and not negative ones. Don't spread fear and hate, because fear and hate create more distance between the two sides. Stories of hope and reconciliation create more hope and more reconciliation. You can really move the needle a little bit forward by spreading the good news. Last, getting to the end, encourage your family, friends, houses of worship to learn the narrative of and to empathize with and to support both Israelis and Palestinians. If you're learning Hebrew, learn Arabic. Reach out to people of other religions and ethnicities, learn about them, join and create a framework for dialogue. And lastly, we always end by saying that if you enter this meeting today as a strong supporter of Palestine, there may not be anyone like this in the call today, then we hope you leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. If you enter this meeting as a strong supporter of Israel, we hope you'll leave as a strong supporter of Israel. But we ask you not to leave as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. Rather, leave as a strong supporter of one side and a strong supporter of the other side as well. Unless both sides get what they need, want, and deserve, the other side will not get neither what it needs, wants, and deserves. So we urge people to be strong supporters of Israel, strong supporters of Palestine, and that's the only way to be a strong supporter of a better future of peace, reconciliation, and justice for both sides.
Well, to that end, to Rabbi Schlesinger and to Nor, thank you so much for sharing with us your really inspiring story. It is fantastic to hear from you, and please everybody support and be part of Roots, not just only in financial, but spread the stories. I think those are fantastic stories to spread. Thank you so much. This is the third of a 4-part series of Peace is Possible. Next week, we'll be having our very own Australian Itai Fleischer. We'll be talking about Kids for Peace, a wonderful organization based in Jerusalem of doing similar peacemaking work. To everybody, I hope you have a wonderful week. Rabbi Schlesinger, Noor, thank you so much. You should stay safe and continue and be chazak ve'ematz. You should just continue and go from strength to strength in all your fantastic work. Kol hakavod. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Thanks.